Hello everyone, and welcome to A Teacher Explains.
I'm a teacher, and in this explainer, we're going to break down four really big ideas, four major theories that basically act as different lenses for how we study mass media. So you shouldn't think of these as strict rules. It's much more useful to see them as four totally different toolkits. Each one gives researchers a different way to understand the media's role in our world. They ask different questions, they look for different things, and they give us really unique ways of seeing everything. So let's jump right in. Okay, here's a quick look at where we're headed. First, we'll tackle postpositivist theory, which is all about finding cause and effect. Then we'll jump into cultural theory, focusing on how we create meaning. After that, it's critical theory, where we'll look at power structures. Then we'll cover normative theory, which sets the ideal standards for media. And finally, we'll put them all side by side to see how they stack up. All right, let's dive into our first approach, postpositivist theory. Now, this one has its roots deep in the scientific method. It actually grew out of an older idea called positivism, which basically said, hey, if you can't observe it and measure it, it's not real knowledge. So, what's the main goal here? Well, it's all about finding clear cause and effect relationships. A post-positivist researcher is asking questions like, did that political ad actually cause a change in how people voted? Or, the classic one, does watching violent TV shows cause kids to be more aggressive? They use tools you'd recognize from science class, like surveys and experiments, to try and explain, predict, and sometimes even control how communication affects us. Okay, so this whole approach rests on a few core beliefs. First, it assumes there's a real, actual social world out there, and that we can study it scientifically, just like a biologist studies a cell. Second, the research has to be super careful and systematic. You can't just wing it. A huge deal here is objectivity. The researcher has to try their best to stay neutral and keep their own opinions out of the mix. And finally, one study is never the final word, right? So confidence in a finding only really builds when other researchers can do the same study and get the same results. That has a fancy term, intersubjective agreement. And that brings us to a really important question. The post-positivist approach is great for finding those A causes B links. But what if you're not trying to predict what people will do? What if you just want to understand the meaning behind why they do it? And that question leads us perfectly into our second approach, cultural theory. This whole perspective really came about because some scholars felt that post-positivism was, a bit limited. They argued that human communication is just way too messy and complex to be boiled down to simple cause and effect. So with cultural theory, the focus does a complete 180. We're shifting away from prediction and diving headfirst into interpretation. Instead of asking, what effect does this TV show have on people, a cultural theorist is going to ask, what does this show mean to its fans? It's all about studying how media helps us build a shared reality and trying to understand a culture from the inside. As you can probably guess, this approach comes with a totally different set of assumptions. First off, it completely rejects the idea of a single objective reality that we can measure. Instead, it says that reality is socially constructed. We build it together through communication. The main tool here is interpretation, this deep dive into meaning, which is sometimes called hermeneutics. The knowledge you get from this isn't universal, it's local and depends heavily on the context. And here's a big one. Instead of trying to get rid of researcher bias, this theory says, hey, the researcher's perspective is not only inevitable, it's actually part of the process. Okay, but that opens up another can of worms, doesn't it? If we're all building reality together, who has the most influence? Who's in charge of the construction site? What role does power play in deciding which ideas become mainstream and which ones get pushed to the side? And that's the exact question that our third approach, critical theory, is obsessed with. This one has some pretty heavy-hitting roots in Marxist thought, and it was really developed by a group called the Frankfurt School. And here's the thing about critical theory. It's not happy to just sit back and observe or interpret the world. It wants to actively change. So the goal here is nothing less than transformation. Critical theorists look at the big structures in society. We're talking media ownership, political systems, the economy, and they try to expose the hidden power dynamics and inequalities. The whole point isn't just to write a paper about it. It's to use that knowledge to help build a fairer, more just world. So what are the basic assumptions? Well, critical theory starts from the idea that our society is built on a foundation of inequality and power struggles. It sees our reality as this constant push and pull between big social structures that hold us back, and our own agency, our power to act and make change. The goal is to create what they call emancipatory knowledge. That's a fancy way of saying knowledge that frees people, that helps them see and fight against oppression. So yeah, this approach is unapologetically value-driven. It's all about advocating for things like justice and equality. Okay, so we've looked at theories that try to explain, understand, or even change the world as it is, but that brings up a totally different kind of question. What's the ideal role for the media? Forget what it is doing for a second. What should it be doing? And that question is the heart of our fourth and final approach, normative theory. This one's a little different from the others because its main job isn't to describe what the media is doing, but to lay out what it ought to be doing. Yeah, the whole point of normative theory is to create ideal standards or benchmarks. It's not so much focused on the day-to-day reality of media, but on the question of how media should operate to best serve the public good. It tackles those really big questions like, what does a free press really look like in a healthy democracy? And those ideals become the measuring stick we use to judge how our actual media is doing. Okay, let's break down its core assumptions. First and foremost, as we've said, it's about what the media should do, not what it does. It also recognizes that these ideals aren't universal. They're tied to a specific social system. The ideal media for a democracy is going to be very different than for another form of government, right? So its main method is comparison, looking at how the media actually performs and holding it up against these ideals. And because of that, the whole thing is, by its very nature, value-laden. It's grounded in big social values like democracy and serving the public good. All right, we've made it through all four theories. Now for the fun part. Let's put them all side by side and really see how they're different. This chart really lays it all out for us. Look at the top row, the primary goal. You've got postpositivism trying to explain and predict, while cultural theory just wants to understand meaning. Critical theory is all about critiquing and transforming society, and normative theory is focused on setting those ideals. Now, check out their view of reality. Postpositivism sees it as objective and independent. Cultural theory says, no way, it's socially constructed. It's a huge difference. And finally, the role of values. Postpositivism tries to minimize them. Cultural theory embraces them. Critical theory sees them as essential tools for advocacy. And for normative theory, well, values are the entire foundation of the whole thing. So, as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with something to think about. We've just gone through 4 completely different lenses for looking at the media. So think about your own media diet. The news you read, the shows you binge watch, the social media you scroll through. Which one of these approaches really clicks for you? Are you more interested in predicting effects, understanding meaning, critiquing power, or judging it all against some ideal? There's no right answer, but it's a great way to start thinking more deeply about the media in your life. Just so you know, all the concepts we talked about today come from the fantastic book, Mass Communication Theory by Baran and Davis. I really hope this gives you a new set of tools for analyzing the media.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel.